Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends, I'm covering the newest machine of war in this video, the Thousand Suns Daemon Prince Psyker. If you're here for a 15-second summary, the Daemon Prince's primary ability deploys him on the battlefield to attack your enemies, but just for a single turn. His secondary ability deals fire damage to enemies that are already on fire hexes or have taken psychic damage. As always, a quick thank you to my Patreons for their support. On the Machine of War screen, Psyker looks awesome. Snowprint's art department as usual have done a great job, and the model looks even cooler when deployed on the battlefield. Machines of War have no stats of their own, but they have a primary and secondary ability, both of which start on a 1-turn cooldown for Psyker. The primary ability, Aether Stride, summons Psyker onto the battlefield. Feeding into his Thousand Suns synergy, on the turn that Psyker is deployed, if he is summoned adjacent to a friendly Psyker, he immediately performs a normal attack. When deployed, Psyker has the Hunter of Souls ability. That lets him perform a normal attack against an enemy in range, which deals bonus damage for adjacent friendly Psykers, before he leaves the battlefield and returns to his Machine of War state. I'll show you how all of this plays out in a second. His secondary ability is quite similar to the Forge Fiend's or Toth's active ability. Infernal Cannon targets a hex on the battlefield, and then deals fire damage to all enemies that have taken fire or psychic damage already this turn. The targeted hex is then set on fire. The mythic ability won't be relevant for most players for a long time. It essentially gives Psyker characters a damage boost, up to 20% at max mythic settings. The abilities are simple enough, but let's take a look at some gameplay clips before diving into the numbers. In this clip here, we use the active ability and deploy the machine onto the battlefield. The Machine of War has 5 traits: Summon, Psyker, Daemon, Big Target, and the Thousand Suns faction trait, Weaver of Fates. It has the psychic damage profile for both melee and ranged attacks, with 4 and 3 hits respectively. In this clip, there are no friendly units nearby, nor enemies, so the Daemon Prince flies away next turn. Uninspiring, but let's ramp up. Now we have an enemy for the Prince to attack. Without a Psyker there straight away, the Prince doesn't do anything. The enemy can easily move away, and we find ourselves in a similar position to the first clip, an ineffective machine deployment. However, things get much better when we have a Psyker nearby. Now, the Prince flies in and makes an attack because it is adjacent to Abraxas. That attack also benefits from bonus damage, courtesy of the Hunter of Souls buff. I've also given Abraxas the Book of Fate relic, which triggers the summon to attack again, and the Prince goes for another swing. It attacks again on the way out for some impressive cumulative damage. You can see that when the Daemon Prince has left the battlefield, it can still use its secondary Machine of War ability that turn. In this clip, having dealt some psychic damage to various enemies, they all now take a bunch of flame damage. There's one other quick thing to point out in the gameplay section. Despite being a Psyker, this machine cannot be repositioned with Yazagor, as shown in this clip. The most exciting part of this machine, I think, is in its deployable effect. When deployed, the Daemon Prince is impressive. With 4 hits, 100% pierce, and bonus damage from Psykers, it puts out a lot of damage both for PvP and guild raid settings. Clearly, you want to bring the Daemon Prince along Psykers for maximal effect, and to that end, I have listed all of the Psykers currently in the game on this slide. We'll start with a raid focus, and these are the characters you might expect to see in the Psyker team. I understand that Mythic and specifically Relics are a sore point at the moment, which I have fed back repeatedly to Snowprint, but let's explore the topic anyway in hopes of a resolution soon. The Neurothrope with its Norn Crown can give a nice bonus to the Daemon Prince, since it counts as a Psyker and a summon. At max settings, the Prince does 834 damage at baseline, and a maxed out Norn Crown adds roughly 1300 damage, more than doubling the Daemon Prince's damage output. Damage buffs are particularly nice for Psyker since it does unblockable damage, has a 100% pierce ratio, and has a decent amount of hits per attack. Several attacks can also be triggered in the same turn, as we'll come to shortly. Archimatos and Abraxas also stand out, both usable in the summon-heavy version of the Psyker team with the Norn Crown. Both of them have the Book of Fate relic that lets the Prince attack again, and the book also has some extra text that gives the Daemons bonus damage. It is the same size boost that the Neurothrope provides. Based on testing, if there are multiple nearby summons, the Book of Fate tries to reactivate adjacent daemons first over non-daemon summons, and then, if there are multiple daemons, then it seems to choose the one with the highest ability level. I've put all that together on this slide where we crunch the numbers against a raid boss, for example against a Legendary 5 avatar. I've also added in the damage bonus for the Hunter of Souls passive, and over 5 rounds you can see how Psyker does over 100,000 damage. You do need Archimatos and Abraxas in order to trigger those extra attacks, so there is some optimal placement required, but to offset that, I have excluded Ahriman's passive bonus from this calculation. While we spent a lot of time crunching the numbers for raids, we could theoretically do the same thing for PvP or Guild War. In places like this, you can see how these sorts of numbers would allow the Daemon Prince to solo kill entire enemy characters with a similar setup. It's all well and good to theory craft about how impressive the numbers are, but the replays put things into visualization. Here are 2 that I worked on with Tacticus ambassador and friend Hitsunagashi. On the left is a more traditional team with the Exorcist battle tank, probably the competing machine choice against Psyker for the Psyker team. On the right is our Daemon Prince run. Psyker ends up outperforming by around 100,000, or roughly 10% on this Legendary 5 avatar run. As the replays run through on screen, I will point out also that I think the Daemon Prince is probably the most ammunition-hungry machine of war in the game at the moment. Because Psyker only lasts a turn, it would theoretically cost you 5 ammo per battle for max output, which is a huge amount of a finite resource. Anyway, the replay puts into gameplay what we have already said. This machine is a damage monster. Before we move on to the incursion, Tawan, Tacticus ambassador and friend, has helpfully thrown this graph together for us, relating to the machine's secondary ability. We haven't covered it a huge amount in this video, but it is a fairly straightforward damage effect, and this graph helps to illustrate how much damage you might expect it to do against equally scaled characters. Next, incursion. Machine of War progression remains an issue that I highlighted in my last video on the Rucka Truck. Just running tier 12 and buying nothing else would take 6 incursions to bring a new Machine of War to Legendary Blue Star. The 7th would have enough Mythic shards to get to Mythic, but you'd need to supply most of the orbs. So while it's super cool to use, the Mythic Machine of War features aren't easily accessible unless you're willing to fork out cash. For the Daemon Prince machine, we can use a selection of Xenos characters. You can see these on screen, but it looks like the Orcs, Necrons, Tau, Tyranids, and Genestealers are the usable factions. The enemies for this incursion are the Thousand Suns. None of these enemies are new, so I won't spend too much time here, but I'll just cycle through the Mythic level in case any of you fancy trying your luck or getting the rewards there. If you haven't seen my updated Machine of War guide for 2025, I would recommend checking it out. I've used the same assessment model for this machine. I think Psyker is going to be good in any game mode where you can use Psykers. As shown, it will be great in raids, but I think also in war. Unlike Galatian, it is probably a bit better in Tournament Arena, since you aren't forced into one deployment position for the entire fight. The downside, obviously, is how expensive using the machine is. Overall, I think Psyker is probably something you don't need to invest in as an early to mid-game player, but a really valuable tool for end-game content and diversity. That's all I've got. I hope you found it useful. A big shout out to my Patreons for supporting me, and bye for now.